Beautiful.
That's my hair.
You're having a great hair day, actually. Welcome, everybody, to Casks and Classics. We are here on 57th Street in Manhattan at the beautiful, brand spanking new Analog Shift offices with Mr. James Lamdin. Hello, James.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, very happy to be here. And Mr. Matthew Wozniak, brand specialist for the Glen office in Metro New York.
Hello, everybody.
His inaugural Casks and Classes. So welcome to the team. Cheers, guys. Very, very excited to be chatting with you guys today.
Indeed.
And that's the show. We're just here drinking whiskey, so you can watch us do this for the next 2 hours if you'd like.
That's exactly what we're going to do.
It's what we do best, I think. So
yeah, I have that on my resume. That's basically it.
Really good at drinking whiskey.
Yeah.
So 2012, Analog Shift is founded, correct?
That's right.
Beautiful. And it says that you founded it for the passion of history and great design. But the truth is that you were looking for a job in watches and no one would hire you, correct?
That is exactly how it went down. In years before that, I had tried to get into the watch industry through more traditional means. And I kept hearing the same thing, which is like, you know, you're passionate about watches, you know a thing or two about watches, you've got some background in the luxury industry, go get a job anywhere else for anyone else, and then come back to us and we'll consider you. And I was like, all right, it's one of those sort of catch-22 things. And after some thoughtful consideration and really some, being poked and prodded by some colleagues, they just encouraged me to go do it on my own. So that's what I did. And so I launched Analog Shift in 2012 to really just be a different type of vintage watch dealer. We had a focus on e-commerce, which, seems crazy today, but 10 years ago, we were on the cutting edge of that. Being able to click and add a vintage watch to your shopping cart on a website was brand new. Instagram was also coming out, so we really sort of got a leg up on that. We had a followership built right out of the gate, and yeah, we went from there.
Beautiful. And you are focusing on your passion for storytelling and your passion on history, and that's something that the Glen office really focuses on as well, right? There's a long-winded history from the Glen office, from the distillery. What can you say similar to the story of going off and taking a chance? Anything you correlate that with Glen Rothes, what it did in its history?
Yeah, absolutely. So Glen Rothes has had kind of a turbulent history, as you may or may not know. It was founded in 1878 by James Stewart, and after a handful of years, there was actually a fire that burnt down a majority of the distillery. Their local Reverend William Sharp, Bill Sharp as I like to call him.
Good old Bill.
Good old Bill.
Went to their local chapel and essentially had a fundraiser to raise funds to rebuild the distillery. So the distillery was rebuilt. I believe in 1903 there was an explosion that blew up about 200,000 gallons worth of whiskey. So another big setback. And then once again, mistaken, but I know it was in the 60s, there was actually a second fire during an expansion process. So it's been turbulent for them to say the very least, but they're definitely pushing through all the adversities to say the least. It's
we've had no explosions at Analog Shift.
We'll see what happens with your high polish sheet. Hopefully no one's
Well, our old office, we did have to eventually vacate our old office because the single elevator in that building kept lighting on fire.
Oh.
So while it never affected our office, it did affect our ability to host people. On the other hand, my staff got very fit climbing all those stairs. So,
Explains the calves on you.
That's right. Some good gams.
So nothing more authentic than having to walk up to work every day. But,
that's right.
And good old New York life, everyone's a walk up, right? But
that's right.
You really pride yourself on being a trustworthy person that is showcasing authentic materials, right? So now, with that passion for authenticity, being trustworthy, where did your passion for history and design start?
I think at a fairly young age. I've always been very close with my grandparents, and I think that's actually a very common theme amongst watch collectors. We're drawn to historical things, right? And for me, the gateway to watches specifically was my grandfather, who after his passing wasn't around to tell me the stories of his stuff anymore. He had art and he had music and he had some clothes, and everything he had a story that came with it. And when he was gone, I had to start learning about the object to try and place him in the story, right? Here's a man of taste and distinction and, you know, well-traveled. Why would he have had that thing? And I think as a guy, I always liked stuff. I always liked mechanical things, whether it's pocket knives or cars or, you know, vinyl record players. And so I think I had a predisposition towards liking these things.
Yep.
And then with his passing and this sort of mission to understand him better through his stuff that I was rifling through, that's sort of where it all came from. But yeah, I guess it goes back a little bit further to childhood too, when you just sort of start seeing things and you identify something as nice, or your folks tell you, don't play with that.
Yes.
Because it costs too much. And then those sort of lessons, eventually you figure out why. And so I think it started young, and then you know, I was about 20 when my grandfather died, my father's father, and that was really the kickoff down the rabbit hole into what led me here today.
That's amazing. And so did you always see yourself going down a career path in which that you would be embracing design and creativity? What like when you're a junior of college?
Yeah.
You think you're going to be on 57th Street in Manhattan?
No.
Running on a watch shift?
Definitely not. Definitely not. No, my first real career was actually in outdoor equipment and apparel.
Okay.
I worked for a Northeast-based retailer. I loved, you know, I grew up in New England and I loved being outdoors. And you wouldn't tell today, but I was once very athletic and fit. And so that was my first, it was a retail job. And I climbed the ladder and got into retail management, was managing, you know, multiple stores and all that at a very young age. But what they didn't tell you is that if you love going outdoors, don't do retail in outdoor, because you never get to go outside. You just get to help other people get suited up to go outside. And then when I moved to New York, I followed arguably my first passion, which was in cars. And I had a great thing going for a while. I got a little bit, after about 5 years, I really wanted more for myself. And so I started chasing a management title in the auto industry. And that's where it all went downhill. And if you love cars, similarly, maybe don't work in cars. And so when it came time to start my own thing, I looked at myself in the mirror. I haven't really said this too many times. I looked myself in the mirror and I said, do you want to do this for yourself? Like, do you want to do this to yourself? Because you loved going outdoors and you came to hate it. Not going outdoors, but the industry. You loved cars, but you came to sort of just see it as a job. Do you want to follow another passion and risk screwing it up for yourself? And I looked myself in the mirror and I said, you know what? This time it's on your terms. You're making the rules. So if you start hating watches, you have nobody to blame but yourself.
It's so from 2012 to now, doing pretty well.
Doing pretty well.
Yeah.
I now have a boss. Analog Shift has been acquired recently by the Watches of Switzerland Group.
Cheers for that.
Thank you very much. And I got to tell you, these guys understand what we're about and have empowered us to keep doing what we do, just bigger and better. So it's been great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And hopefully that you haven't found a hatred for your passion.
Hatred for your passion. Yeah. This episode's title, A Hatred for Your Passion.
It's a great t-shirt.
Tonight at 5.
Great t-shirt.
It's like moving in with friends. You know?
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't work like that. You know?
But just as much as I've learned to enjoy talking watches with James, I enjoy talking whiskey with you, and not just our whiskey, but numerous. So what got you into your passion for whiskey? What led you to run an office, and how are you enjoying this side of the business now and working on the brand side?
It's really cool. So kind of what got me into it, I have a long-winded history with, you know, working in bars and restaurants for the most part. Basically did that, you know, right out of junior college, and got a job at like a very craft-oriented restaurant. You know, developed a palate for good food, nice quality style of service, you know, upscale whiskey as well. I think over just time that developed. You know, I was kind of catapulted in that world, and I clung on to it pretty quickly. So it's fun to learn the different types of whiskeys and gins and tequilas and, oh, mezcal, what's this? That's a little different. It's kind of like tequila, but it's not quite. And then, you know, same thing with whiskey. You know, you have American whiskey or Scotch whiskey. Now you have Japanese, which is huge in the market. There's so much diversity to it that I think that's something that has always appealed to me. So I don't know, there's a lot of craftsmanship that goes into it, and I have a lot of respect for that as well. So something that, I just looked at and I was like, this is pretty cool, I can get into it. And then the more you try it, and you're working with like-minded people as well. So some people have already developed this passion, they're 10, 15 years into it. I'm just starting out, they're showing me what's good, stay away from that, try this. Yeah, let's go out tonight, I'll take you to a really cool whiskey bar. So, I got to explore a lot just being in the service industry. I got to meet some really cool people. I mean, some of the best people in my life through the service industry, hands down, undoubtedly. And that's kind of where I just jumped in and clung on. I was doing service industry for about 10 years before I moved out here to New York. And then I worked in what we call off-premise, which is a retail store.
Shut up, Broadway.
That's where the passion started to rear its ugly head. And retail, you're right.
Retail's tough. It's really tough.
The perk was, getting things at cost.
Sure.
So that was nice, not paying the third-party value or the secondary market. But to answer your question, Tommy, coming on to this side of the fence, so to speak, it's been fantastic. It's so much fun. It's great because it's something that I'm passionate about. It's something I get to go out into the field, so to speak, through the city, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Connecticut, Long Island, Staten Island. And I get to talk whiskey. I do stuff like this. It's something I'm passionate about. It's just two things that just, blend together seamlessly for me. I couldn't love it more.
You're excelling at it, if I must say so, sir.
Right.
And it's awesome. You say there's many different types, and when you walk into this beautiful office, you see so many different types of watches on there and timepieces. But you have this certain passion for history and storytelling. So when someone does come on in here and they see all these different watches, right? How do you express your love for all of this, which is a very deep dive? I thought this would be one of the things where I did a little bit of research and I went to watches. The wormhole you will go down trying to have a conversation with James is absurd, and especially trying to understand this locker that's behind the cameras right now.
Yeah.
But how do you?
It's a few hundred shiny things in there.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
How do you tell that? How do you tell that history? How do you tell that story?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cool thing about watch enthusiasm, watch collecting, is that there's a number of different points of entry into the hobby. You can come at it for design. You can come at it for the mechanicals, the internal cogs and gears and springs that are doing their thing. There's some mechanical nerdery there. You can do it for an investment. You can do it purely for a little bling, and there's no shame in that either. Or there's this romantic X factor, right? And that could be the history or heritage of a particular model or a particular brand, or even the provenance behind a particular piece. Or it could just sort of be something a little bit less identifiable that sort of permutates all of these things. So I guess when you come into our shop or any watch shop and you start going down that rabbit hole head first at terminal velocity, I think the things to sort of think about and look out for are, what are your triggers? What gets you excited about a watch? And for me, it is always the story. Sure, there are watches that I love for their design. There are watches that I geek out on the movement for. There are some really good investments in my portfolio. But by and large, I think what makes me care about watches are the stories. And so I try to help whomever might be looking to add a timepiece to their collection or start a collection. I try to figure out what that button is for them. And more often than not, even if they are coming at it from an investment category or purely liking the design, sometimes it's helping them learn the story behind why it's a good investment, or why it's such an iconic design. So I love sharing stories. I like to consider myself a part-time treasure hunter and a part-time storyteller.
Excellent.
Selling watches, I could do without it. But helping people buy them for the right reasons, I'm all about it.
And that's why I love the industry that Matt and I have chosen, because it's the same thing. I like whiskey. I like drinking whiskey. I like telling stories around whiskey. But as you get into a deep dive with it, I really enjoy the individual whiskey stories for themselves. And we spoke about Wyoming whiskey, which is another brand for us. I personally think is the best story in whiskey. Another episode, another brand.
Same time next week.
But yeah, that's called pulling back in, I think, right? But it really is. The story goes a long way. And I used to always go to pro wrestling. I made Matt watch the Dusty Rhodes promoting in his Hard Times promo, right? So if you never watched professional wrestling before in your life, you need to know who Dusty Rhodes was. You watch him deliver Hard Times and tell that story of where he's from and why he's gone through hard times, you're invested. You're watching. Now you're a fan. You know?
Yeah, that's right.
Stories could really drive you in. And a rich, historic story such as the Glenn Rothus, I mean, people that are doing something from 1879, they should be doing it right.
That's right.
And it's amazing. And it's amazing to go through this and see all these. But it's also amazing to see what someone's passion will bring them and where their eye will go to understand and become a master in what they're doing. Mm-hmm. I like to say that Matt and I were on our way to becoming whiskey experts. I'm fairly confident you are a wristwatch expert here.
You know, it's subjective terminology for sure. I actually prefer the term specialist.
It's a good word.
I specialize in it. I do it for a living. I allegedly pay my rent with it. Expert to me, again, this is all subjective, but to me, expert means you've mastered it to a point where there's nothing left to learn. And that bores me, and I don't ever want to be an expert. Whatever, it is just a word.
It's a tough word, and my wife was sweet enough to write my biography for me.
Ooh.
And she called me a whiskey
for the dust jacket of your novel?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. For what we call it, The Death of Your Passion, the book that I'm writing.
Hatred for Your Passion?
Hatred for Your Passion, yes. But
collected stories from the retail industry.
But she put in whiskey expert, and I did not like being called it. I'm like, oh, that's just
right?
what I do.
Now, master's cool. That's got like a whole Jedi thing going on, which I know you can get down with.
I'm with that.
But let's skip over expert and go from specialist to master.
Yes.
How about
whiskey
that?
drink to eye. Yes. But your eye captured watches, but before it, what was the first design where you looked at something and you're like, you know what? That's what my parents told me not to touch. That's expensive. That's where I'm going. What was the first thing that caught your attention? You're like, I want to research that and understand what makes it do what it's supposed to do.
Well, it's going to be the Rolex GMT Master, specifically the 1675
Master,
1670. GMT Master, bang! See, woo! It's like we planned it.
Bringing it all around.
It's one of these actually I'm wearing right now. But my father had one. It was a secondhand watch that my mother had bought him as a wedding gift from actually one of her brother's college roommates who was a pilot. And the GMT Master has 2 time zones, so it tells the wearer the time locally and at a departure or destination. And the idea behind it was requested by Pan American. So Pan Am came to Rolex and said, we need a watch. I love this. Because we can now fly from New York to London or Paris in a single go. Right? This is the dawn of the jet age. And we're crossing how many time zones are we, all in once instead of hopping across the Atlantic so that people could set their watches, each stop of the way. Our pilots are going so fast, they need to know what time it was at JFK and what time it is at Heathrow or Dulles. At Charles de Gaulle, And I think there's some romanticism there. I mean, like, this is our grandparents' generation, and they were the first jet setters. And so my mom had bought my dad this secondhand watch, and it was by far the most valuable thing in the home. Maybe second only to the car in the driveway, right? And it's like, do not mess with that, kid. And then later, after my grandfather died, I was exploring his collection, and I was like, hey, my dad's got a Rolex. And like, I know Rolex is nice. And I'd had a little involvement with getting my dad's watch repaired at one point. My mom had squirreled away some money to go get it fixed, and I was involved in the caper at one point, I think for his 40th birthday. And then, my grandfather left some watches to my uncles and my cousins, and I, tried to like get a little bit of a hint as to what they all were, but then it captivated me, right? And then I sort of wanted to start figuring out what watch could come to define my style.
Yeah.
And although I didn't get there immediately, from a Rolex standpoint, it ended up being the watch that my father had, and he still has. And I'll get it someday, but hopefully not anytime soon. But I've ended up sort of getting other ones to sort of honor that. And, I think it's my favorite Rolex because it's got a great story, but it also has a personal story. It's my old man's watch, and, sorry, getting misty here.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But and I like how that really drives home your mission statement of authenticity and trustworthy. Because hearing that story, you don't get more authentic than that. That's really
Thank you.
that's really cool. I appreciate that. And there's so many different ways of looking at it, like coming where I come from, it's what you would drink on the weekends, right? So getting into artistry, and my dad just appreciated good things. My dad likes Jack Daniels. That's his whiskey of choice.
Okay.
So I knew Jack Daniels was good whiskey. You know?
Sure.
It's like that's what I started off with. Being Bay Ridge, it was Jameson. You know, so what Irish drinkers at Bay Ridge go out and have some Jameson. But you learn things from home, and it's really cool that you took that into this. That in your first introduction being a Rolex is kind of interesting.
For sure.
But with a pretty awesome story with that.
Yeah.
I still have to go and put a setting on my iPhone. I watch this again now. You know,
It definitely gives better time.
Yeah.
You know, when my grandfather died, the watch that my dad inherited, which is also sort of eventually going to be mine, was actually a Movado. But it was an unusual Movado that had a movement made by a company called Zenith, which made the world's first automatic chronographs. And it's a very unusual watch. And I didn't know what the hell it was. Movado, Dad, why'd you pick a Movado? Of all the watches you were the oldest son. Why did you pick that? And honestly, he didn't either. He picked it because it looked cool. And he was right. It did look cool.
Yeah.
And then I got to sort of, peer into that story. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is a watch nerd's watch. I didn't know my grandfather was that much of a watch nerd. Turns out he was. And that also helped inspire my style and the formation of Analog Shift.
Awesome. And I'm taking a step back with that. That's one word that you hear a lot, chronograph watch.
Yeah. What's a chronograph? What the hell is a chronograph?
What's the definition of that?
Yeah, chronograph it's a stopwatch, right? So on a wristwatch, it's a wrist chronograph. Wrist stopwatch. It's got a start button and a stop button and a reset button. Sometimes all the same button, but now we're getting deep. It's basically it's a timer.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Another thing that the iPhone overdo. And
except when the EMP comes and nukes all the microwaves and everything, and we still got mechanical wristwatches to keep us on time.
I say that as a compliment to the wristwatch, not the iPhone. I'm just saying, I want to throw my phone against the wall.
Yeah, I have a hate relationship with my tech.
Yeah.
Now,
same with me.
I'm curious, as far as the chronograph goes, what's the purpose of actually integrating that into a wristwatch? Is it truly for functionality and people use it? Because I imagine, back in the day it was commonly used, but obviously I'm a fairly new citizen and it's got a chronograph in it. Is it part of like the almost like proving like your mechanical prowess that I can integrate multi-functions into a wristwatch?
Sure.
Or is it truly just to be used for that reason? I guess
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think what's cool about wristwatches, and I think probably, dare I say, probably the most popular reason for wristwatches to buy wristwatches today is their heritage as purpose-built instruments.
Yes.
Right. I think this is going to change, but that's also for another time. The first chronographs were pocket watches, right? And then when they started making them into wristwatches, they were instruments, and whether they were for doctors to measure pulse, whether they were for racing drivers to measure lap time, whether it was that application used in space by Omega on the Apollo 13 mission when they used the Omega Speedmaster to time their burn so that they had their re-entry angle right, so they didn't burn up in the upper atmosphere.
wow, that's good marketing for Omega.
Yeah, they will never let us forget it either. Or any number of other things. So you want to measure intervals, you want to measure laps, or you want to measure elapsed time. For most wristwatch collectors today, you don't really use it for any of the purposes that it was originally developed. You might, measure it to see how much time you're waiting in line at the DMV.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something about knowing that it could and has.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big reason that watches are popular today. It's not what they are used for today, but what they were once used for. So heritage, whether it's really expanded upon by the brand selling the watch, or just by the very nature of this being an analog device that's completely outdated, but they're so popular today because they're built to last and they did a thing.
It also makes sense, I guess, going into diver watches. How much air you have in your tank? It's pretty important.
Yeah.
It's still something that I would want to use it for if I'm going underneath the water.
Yeah, I mean, you want to use a diving watch to measure elapsed time right? So you can time your decompression stops or whatever else you're doing. I mean, you need to understand these are life and death things.
Yeah.
Right? And before the advent of digital tech, wrist computers, phones, whatever else you've got going on in your space capsule or submarine or whatever else it is, you relied on this device. And so actually, not to like get a little bit deeper into that, it has now become for watch manufacturers sort of like it's a little bit of a prize to say, we were able to get all of these functions into a mechanical device, right? It is almost a prowess thing. Like how many complications, which are just anything a watch does other than tell the time, can we fit into this small package? Now it's a little bit more of like a showing off thing.
Gotcha.
But originally, each one of those complications was for a purpose.
Yeah, just purely functionality.
That's right. Not the least of which is pure accuracy. That's the first hill to climb.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Tiny little gears and dials and the most minute little inner workings of things.
I mean, this is a detail-oriented hobby.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, absolutely.
But even for distillation, I mean, if you're a distiller and you have to run off your heads, you got to cut, when to cut your heads, when to cut your tails. I'd much rather have that on my wrist than have it telling me than anything else.
Well, I'll tell you,
Chefs understanding when.
Actually, mechanical wristwatches are very popular in the kitchen.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Big time. Yeah. But I was gonna say though, is like, this is not the first time a watch brand or a watch personality like myself has had a conversation with a whiskey brand. There's much ado about whiskey and watches, right? This is not a new topic, but it's true that there's a lot in common about the process of manufacturing a watch, distilling whiskey, or the comparisons that can really happen between types of watches and types of whiskey. It's real.
1,000%.
And that's why I think we get along so well.
Yeah.
Because I think we've sort of screwed that down a little bit. We're like, okay, here's why, right? And it's story and it's complication. And in watches, it's literally a function. And with an expression of whiskey, it can be a flavor. It can be a story behind why it tastes like that.
And it's your personal flavor, just like it's your personal style.
That's right.
And whiskey is not good because it's old. Watches aren't good because they're old. They're good because they stayed good.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
they know they started out making it with creativity and passion and wanted to do something that was functional.
And throw in a couple fires and one explosion.
And we're off and running.
Adds to the romance of the whole thing. And now it's part of, it's written in stone.
Good old Billy.
Yeah. Some really strong names. Yeah. Like
James Stewart.
Yeah. Oh.
I mean,
no wonder they're still around.
Yeah. Scottish pioneers.
That's right.
But as you come in, again, a lot of stuff that are going on, and we understand asking people, what style of whiskey do they like? What do they drink at home? What do they drink when they're going out? Someone comes in here and what's the question that you ask when you're a client that's coming in that wants to purchase something from Analog Shift?
Well, I think really it's trying to fundamentally understand how they might use it in their life. Is this a pretty thing to look at? Is it just going to go in the safe? Do you want to actually take it out in the world and try and use it the way it was originally designed? Which, by the way, old things can do just as well as new things if you take care of them.
Probably better. Yep. They
don't make them like they used to.
Yes.
Actually, in watches, they do.
Same with
whiskey too. And there's one of those sort of lowest common denominator. They still do it that way for a reason. It seems like we're beating up on Omega all of a sudden, but Omega just reintroduced their most famous chronograph movement. All right, the actual mechanism inside their watch. They sort of moved away from it in the late 60s, and it's become sort of a thing of legend. Caliber 321. It's the movement inside the Speedmaster that accompanied Armstrong and Aldrin to the moon, right? And they discontinued it that same year in the name of more efficient, less expensive, easier to repair mechanisms. They brought it back last year.
Maybe they were the guys that, we haven't been back to the moon. Didn't have the right watch.
Yeah, basically. But that's a strange coincidence. But like they're literally, and it's expensive to manufacture this movement, and there aren't as many watchmakers in the world who are qualified to repair these movements. But the demand for that sort of story was there. That's a big deal to revive a movement that hasn't been made in 50 years just because it's better.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That is cool.
And frankly, I think watches have something, the watch industry today, the watch manufacturers today have something to learn from whiskey, who've been playing the heritage card the entire time a little bit more subtly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do things the right way.
Yeah.
And I think Glenrothes nails that, doing things the right way. Having some cooperage, all the over-investment into the sherry seasoned casks, nailing doing things the right way.
Yeah, having their own farms, sitting on 320 acres, using 5 different water sources. Like you said, doing things the right way, it's paramount. It's what people look for when they want a good quality spirit. It's what draws somebody like ourselves into something. And like you said, a lot of these watches have good stories. And when I learned about a new whiskey, well, I want to know the story behind it. What's making this unique? Is this another MGP fueled brand? Are you sourcing it? Are you actually doing the whole mashing process and distillation yourselves?
There's nothing wrong with source brands.
There's nothing wrong with badge engineering if it's done thoughtfully.
Of course. I think I'm just a little more niche-y, so maybe I have somewhat of a bias.
Oh, it's okay to be a snob in this house. Yeah, we're good here.
Co-signing that as well. Just throwing a disclaimer out there.
Yeah, but like you said, adhering to quality standards and principles, I think Glenrothes really hits the nail on the head, so to speak, because a really good example of that is there's no caramel additive. It's called E150A, and it's basically caramel coloring. Unfortunately, a lot of other distilleries use that because it adds, kind of like a nice amber garnet hue to the whiskey, and it makes it look really sexy and appealing.
Sure, yellow number 5, but for Scotch.
100%, exactly. Yeah. So Glenrothes is, staying true to their principles and not adding that and saying, hey, this is the whiskey. This is the color that's derived from, the distillation process. I'm sorry, but the wood, pulls from the wood after the distillation process. And we're not altering it. We're not going to poke our finger in here and make it look a little different or more appealing. We're not trying to reach out and hit this broad consumer basis with, a catered whiskey, so to speak. We're just going to distill it. We're going to do what we know, how we know best, and we're going to let the whiskey speak for itself. So.
And it goes a long way. And then when we're out, we're sampling people out. And we're sampling your guests on every Tuesday or every Thursday night that we do this?
Oh my goodness. That's every first Thursday.
Every first Thursday.
Yeah.
It's been a long week.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's Monday though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My point that I was trying to prove with that one. So, my favorite part about being on a table, doing what we call the lemonade stands, when people come on up,
right,
we're offering them, is that every single person will have a different favorite with the Glenrothes.
Yeah.
We're making whiskey the way that it's supposed to be made, the way that we, as a brand, feel like it should taste. And there's a different whiskey for every occasion. And that's why I really like the collector side of what you guys are doing. You guys are having guys come in here for the next watch in their collection. And you have your everyday watch. You have that watch that you want to show off. You have that watch that you're only going to wear for black tie events, right?
Sure.
So how do you go about building on that? Where do you start in a collection?
Oof. There's no right or wrong answer to this. I think ultimately is where we have to go with it. But I think today a lot of people are really coming to us for that sporting heritage. So we have a lot of people who want to start with a sports watch, a tool watch. What's a sports watch? Well, a diving watch or a chronograph. Those are both sports watches. Examples of this from Rolex would be a Submariner, GMT Master, Daytona. From Omega, it could be a Seamaster or a Speedmaster. And there's infinite options there, whether you go vintage or contemporary, pre-owned, or brand new. As for style, I don't think, we have people who come in just because they want to have a nice watch for a special occasion. And then all of a sudden, they're down the rabbit hole. We have people who come in because they were gifted an Apple Watch, right? Or other sort of iWatch thing, smartwatch. And they got used to wearing something on their wrist, and then they got interested in what the other options were, and then they fell down the rabbit hole and ended up coming in for a mechanical thing, which I love. I don't think there's a right or wrong place to start, but I think what we're getting at here is that the interest in horology and collecting great watches, it can lead you all kinds of places. And by the way, at every price point. You don't have to spend a lot of money to get a great watch with a good story. And whether you want to get a little field watch or a little sort of everyday casual watch or something sporty that you could wear with blue jeans, or you could wear it with a suit. I mean, James Bond made the Submariner a black tie watch.
And I found out recently that it wasn't the color that you thought it was.
Oh, the strap, yes. In old sort of screen grabs from what was it, Thunderball, the strap that he wore his Submariner on appeared to be black and gray, and so makers of nylon straps made black and gray nylon striped straps, referred to colloquially as NATO style straps, for years, and called that the James Bond color. Well, like high definition came out and they realized there's actually sort of a black and green and red stripe. That was the naval regiment color, which is what they did, in the 60s. And, but he wore it with a tuxedo on a nylon strap. And now, today, 50 some odd years later, Submariner is a dress watch. Yeah. But it started as a diving instrument. A black tie watch, something you wear with a formal occasion, is traditionally supposed to be time only, so no complications, hours and minutes, that's it. No seconds, nothing that moves visibly, just slow creep of time, and very small, very thin, and very unobtrusive. But today you see people wearing formal wear, tuxedos with all manner of bling. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. I think, just very long-winded, getting back to your original question, I think it's like, where do you want to start? Yeah. And there's no wrong answer. We can go all kinds of places here, just like with whiskey.
I love it.
Yeah.
And it's identical. Like you would have your everyday whiskey, right? And then there's whiskey that I'm going to hide from my friends and I'm going to hold on to for dad, right? Good on the mic?
Yes.
Excellent, cool. So you have that whiskey that you're going to hide from your friends, hold on to for dad.
Yeah.
This is the good stuff,
the
right?
Good stuff.
Like my wife, she had some friends over and they wanted to make margaritas. So I gave her a margarita recipe. She's like, what tequila do I use? I'm like, whatever you need in the office. She goes, we're going to use that fancy bottle with like the art on it.
Yeah, the 1942 or something.
It was Class Azul. I was like, put it back. You go bottom shelf. But yeah, it's the same deal. People come on in and we have a gifting option, right? And I want to give something to a friend for the holiday season. Whatever. Yeah. And it's like 25, right? It's like, well, doesn't know. Is that the way that their palate goes? Would they appreciate a 25-year-old whiskey, or they appreciate something with a little more complexity? You can touch on that more, right?
Yeah, of course.
With what would you like if I were to come to you like, I have a gift for somebody and I want to give them something nice? What would you recommend I go with?
I mean, I would say the 18, like right off the bat. I think it's palatable for somebody that doesn't drink whiskey or even scotch on a regular basis, because it doesn't have that smoky, peaty essence that people typically associate with scotch. When they hear the word scotch, they think of probably their grandfather sitting by a fireplace, with a glass of something, swirling it around and taking sips of it. But
which is awesome too.
Yeah,
I've become that grandfather now.
Fan of
that. Which is, like you said, it is awesome as well. But that's not what the flavor profile of Glenrothes is. Yep. So I was saying the 18 because it is quaffable. It's easy to drink. It's forgiving on the palate, so to speak. But on top of that, last year, 2020, the Ultimate Spirits Challenge, Paul Bacol did a blind tasting, rated it the #1 whiskey in the world. He gave it the #3 spirit in the world, and the Chairman's Choice Trophy. So it's got the accolades behind it beyond just being a personal recommendation. Unfortunately, some people are just sold on that type of stuff. They want to know, hey, how many points did this get? How many medals does it have? And a lot of decision making is based upon superficial things like that.
Well, does it do what it says on paper, or does it do what it says in your heart?
It all comes down to the personal palate. And
I learned that in cars, by the way, not watches. It was a colleague of mine from my first job in the car industry, and we were just, I don't know what cars we were comparing, but it was really down to like, do you drive with your heart or do you drive with your head, right? And what that was a reference to was that car outperforms that car on paper, that car outperformed this car on a road test at, Road and Track or Car and Driver or on, one of the blogs or whatever. Like, what makes you feel better? What do you want? And I think that's what it is. It's like the accolades and the awards, and I mean, it's very impressive, by the way.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, not to discredit it by any means, because it's very well
But
deserved.
what does it make you feel?
Absolutely.
And there's no right or wrong answer.
But also when people are like, when Matt and I are talking about a brand, yeah, I mean, of course we're going to say that it's the best thing since sliced bread, but it's not just us saying that it's good. It's a very respective palate.
Yes,
saying
that's
that it's the best. So it goes.
I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah, I like that as well, though. Like, what does it say on paper? I'm a big boxing fan, and on paper, a lot of fighters should do certain things, And then visually, a lot of like if you look at certain athletes, like, wow, that guy is going to beat up that guy. Then you have Tyson Fury, that is the definition of dad bod. Going against Deontay Wilder, who looks like he was genetically engineered in a lab to be a heavyweight champion, and Fury kicks his ass. It's cool. Is the definition of dad bod. Going against Deontay Wilder, who looks like he was genetically engineered in a lab to be a heavyweight champion, and Fury kicks his ass. It's cool, and it's understanding, and it's taking that extra time to appreciate it, do your research, know what's going in, taste different things, try different things.
Try it all.
Yeah.
Try it all. Make your own decisions.
Absolutely. Where we left off was talking. Where we leave off? The watch from every occasion and how things come into play, not being like certain brands telling you certain things. So perfect transition. For our last event, you allowed me to wear the Captain Willard.
Yeah.
And I was blown away when you showed me this, and you're like, you guys can wear one of these. And I just didn't even listen to the other one. I just gave the other one to you. That's what I was looking at. The Captain Willard.
You saw that thing, you're like, mine. Yeah.
And just telling me like that was the diver watch that people that purchased in Vietnam, and that the military Marines used in Vietnam, and that's why it was worn for Apocalypse Now.
That's
which
right.
I then went home and watched Apocalypse Now and looked for it.
Yeah.
The horror.
Yeah.
But it's so cool to see something like that, and then to look around the room for your events and see what everyone else has on them. And I had this conversation with Alessandra, who was the miller who creates hats.
Yeah.
When she creates a hat for someone, that's their hat.
Yeah.
Nothing looks out of place. It might be loud for certain people, but when it's on them, it fits them, right? And every single person that's in this room at one of your events, including yourself, the watch means something, but it flawlessly fits them. Right?
That's right.
It's their watch, and it's perfect for what they're doing, And how do you engulf yourself in that world where you could make those connections, that someone could walk into the room and you're going to be like, I know the watch for you before you even speak. I'm going to give you the history, the breakdown, all that with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated one, right? Because I might know. I might know exactly where they're going to land, even if they don't. But I like to take them on the journey, right? The last thing that Analog Shift wants to do is say, we know what you want. And I think it's probably the same with you guys. We want to hold their hand, teach them, maybe even burden them with information. We've never been shy about giving a prospective buyer so much information that they have to go home and think about it. Like, we aren't about closing the deal right then, right? We're about establishing trust, and we're about showing that we know what we're talking about. And if that means saying, here are all your options to consider, go consider, that's cool. That's really cool. We may know where they're going to land, and we can probably arm them with some tools on a particular model or particular reference or particular brand that we think that they'll probably come around to based on the information they've given to us. Look, I picked the Captain Willard out of my collection there, which is, by the way, a Seiko 6105 for those of you following along at home, because it means something to me, and frankly, I thought maybe you'd like it. So I did it on a micro scale right there in 20 seconds.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. The 6105 was a watch, by the way, the same thing happened to me. This is the first vintage watch I bought.
Oh, wow.
Not that particular one that you borrowed from me the other night, but I was after something else, which we might talk about in a minute. And somebody who was a mentor to me John, said, cool, I'm all with that. Why don't you look at this? And I left his shop in Portland, Maine, and I said, he didn't listen to me. I want this, and he said, go look at another thing. Well, you know what I fucking did? You know what I did? I went home and I started researching the Seiko 6105, and guess what? I bought one within 48 hours. And I showed up, I said, you were right, this thing is awesome, you know? And the reality is, it opened my eyes to something beyond that one thing that I thought I was looking for. And if he hadn't turned me on to that other thing, I might not have gotten into watches as fast as I ended up getting into watches. Because if I had gotten the one thing that I thought I wanted, and by the way, did want and did eventually get many of, because I have that collector gene, it opened my entire mind to vintage watches as like this whole undiscovered country of things to look at. And I like that, and I like to sort of do that for others as well, whether they come to it immediately or later or not at all. The fact that they can learn that there's stuff out there beyond what they think they should buy or they've been told they should buy, or, I mean, there's a lot to human history, and watches are a part of it.
Specifically for an investment you're going to make off of something like that, you want substance from it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's when someone comes to the table, and we know exactly where we want them to go. Yeah. We want you to go home with the most expensive bottle on the table because we're in sales.
Yeah.
But I say that as a joke. But what I really want you to go home with is some education. Mm-hmm. And whenever we're doing a seminar, if we're doing one of our chef pairing series, whatever we're doing, I want you to leave this room after speaking with Matt or myself, understanding something you didn't know about whiskey. And sometimes when people know where they think they want to go and they come to like, give me all this thing you got. It's like, there's so many different roads to take you on before you get to your destination. Let me explain to you why this is so good.
Yep.
You know, like let's start off here and I'll work your way up. But how do you navigate that? How do you educate people on certain spirits?
I love catching people by surprise. That's like my favorite thing to do. When people walk up to a table, or just to me in general, whatever the situation might be, you know, I gauge them, hey, are you a whiskey drinker? Yes or no? I try and see, you know, how blank this canvas is, so to speak. So I ask them a few baseline questions just to see, you know, if you're a whiskey drinker or not. Do you drink Scotch or do you drink American whiskey? Do you drink Scotch? Do you like the big smoky, peaty stuff, or do you want something light and easy going? And then from there, I just kind of cater to their palate. You know, it's kind of like a game of 21 questions, just to see like stylistically what they think they like. And it's funny because the second you put an age statement on something, 12 years, 18 years, 25 years, people, like you said, they're going to gravitate towards that. Like, oh, well, you know, I've got pretty good taste. Let me try the 25 year. And there's been a handful of times where somebody's like, oh yeah, I want to try the 18. And I pour them a taste like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, this is where I wanted to start you, just based upon what you were telling me. You know, this is actually a 12 year. So, you know, mine is 6 years. But you're going to get, I think, a more acute flavor profile to what you're looking for in a whiskey. And they're taken aback by it. They're not expecting to kind of digress, so to speak, and get something they like even more. So, I don't know, it's kind of fun to play around with, like, I shouldn't say play with people's expectations, but just to show them, I guess it's not always what you expect it to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of the thing with going around this is people will come up and I'll be like, hey, would you like to, you know, try some single malt Scotch whiskey? And like, oh no, I don't like Scotch. I'm like, I bet you like this Scotch.
Right.
I've got 4 different ones for me to choose from. And I would say 8 out of 10 times we were able to turn somebody onto it, whether it be, you know, the 10 or the 12 year, or, you know, this maker's cut. There definitely is something for everybody, and it's just a matter of helping them kind of break down that barrier and show them that, no, we can really offer you something different. Just let me in. Let me pour you a little taste.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I was one of those guys who I don't know that I ever walked up to somebody and said, "I want your oldest Scotch," but I thought that older meant better. Right? I mean, I remember moving to New York in my early 20s, and you know, deciding to cough up a little coin for a fancy, you know, dinner out and for a birthday or whatever, and getting that aged steak and all the apps and. coughing up for that 30-year-old, whatever it was. No idea. And being sort of like, okay, I just had a 30-year-old scotch, cool. And then finding out that some of my go-to scotches years later were actually 8 or 10 years old. Because I like different profile. I like something a little bit more aggressive on the palate. How would I have known that unless somebody walked me through that and said, you know what, if you find that kind of boring, let me show you something on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I got this $80,000 watch. Oh, what is it? It's $80,000. Cool, but like, what does it do? It's 80 grand. Did you hear when I said it's 80 grand?
It's
Oh,
all over my Instagram.
cool.
Yeah.
But and there are so many different ways to identify yourself, and what we're dealing with is luxury. And Max Gettinger said it best: it's luxury with a lowercase L, right?
I think he stole that line from me. You did that.
Sorry.
No, you know what? It is for everybody.
It was a layup. I had to use it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I've used that like countless times in internal meetings to describe what analog shift is. It's luxury with a lowercase L.
Yes.
It's luxurious to be able to afford these things and to spend your time on them and to have, watch friends and to go to watch places and do all the watch things. But we're whiskey drinkers. We're not red carpets and champagne.
Watches mean to be worn, right?
That's right.
This is what we do.
That's right. Yeah.
So when you have this conversation about luxury, what is your definition of luxury? What does luxury mean to you?
For me,
Yes.
time. And I don't mean that in the sense of luxury is about having a fine timepiece. To me, luxury is having the time to do things that make you happy. To go to the places you want to go, to be with the people you want to be with. To me, I always talk about this when it comes to like travel, right? Today, luxurious travel is fast. It's about getting there as fast as humanly possible. I don't find any luxury in that at all. I think travel, the most luxurious travel, is you're living a luxurious lifestyle if you can take your time getting wherever it is you want to go.
Get there when we get there.
Enjoy the journey. Cruise ships, and I don't mean, Carnival. I mean, the Titanic, sadly. But at that time, it was the most luxurious experience. Even Zeppelin travel was about lap of luxury.
Train travel too.
Trains, slow, enjoy, look out the window, be with the people you love on your journey, eat the greatest food in the world on this journey. So for me, luxury is the true essence of luxury is time. And there's a great parallel there with what I do for a living in measuring that time. But I've also said that, you don't own a vintage watch to tell the time.
Yes.
You own a vintage watch to experience the passage of time as you float through life luxuriously, or at least aspire to.
Nailed it. I think it's pretty on point. And it fits with us as well, because you can't speed up 18 years,
No, you can't.
There's no fast forward button on aged whiskey, and good things do come in time. It was such a frustrating thing to hear. You get it when you grow up. You'll get it when you have kids or something like that, Now it's like, unfortunately, I feel a grown up. I have a child, I have a career, but I'm understanding things a lot more with time.
Yep.
And it's perfect. Like I said, Tony Stark's the best, right?
Yeah, that's right.
On brand with good old Tony.
Yep.
Hi, Zach Berger. You always say that as well.
The best Tony Stark line pertaining to your industry is, of course, do you have any scotch? I'm starving.
That is a good one. Yeah. I like that a lot. But with that, it takes time to make something the right way. And just from being educated on the watches that you have in your cases, understanding the way that a mechanical watch works, it's fascinating and it's meticulous. And you are really diving in and doing something right. Everything is being done with precision. Every single bolt needs to be done properly to fulfill the final product, right? So it's the same way with distillation. And as we go in with Glen Office, we start out with the finest barley. We have 5 water sources that are around the distillery coming off of the River Spey. We're over-investing in our cask management system, right? We know that 80% of the flavor comes from our casks. Let's put a hell of a lot of our money into these casks to produce some of the finest flavors, right? And as you go down, you have your prep of your barley, you have the mashing of the grains to get their sugars, you have the fermentation process, the distillation process, and the aging and bottling. I thought it'd be cool for you to correlate that with the mechanical watches.
Okay.
So can you explain, you went through a chronograph, you went through a diver watch, you know
Sure.
how they were made. How is a mechanical watch made?
Okay, so give them to me in order here.
So I was basing that the mainspring for power
Yeah.
would correlate with your prep, right? You're starting out with your barley
Yeah.
and picking out your bottle.
We're talking about the function of a watch. It all begins with power, right? You need something, whether it's automatically driven or manually driven or some combination thereof these days. That's where the power is drawn from. So it's a tightly coiled spring that unwinds. And without that, nothing else happens.
So now you showed me a watch the other night that you could shake. That will get the power up and running, right?
Well, I mean,
you have some that will wind. You have
basically a perpetual movement or an automatic movement is something that winds itself by being worn. So the motion of your wrist keeps it alive, right? There's a rotor inside there that's weighted and it spins around and it winds the spring. Before that, it was a manual wind movement, so you'd literally crank it up every morning and tightly coil that mainspring. And then from there, the magic begins. What's the next step?
balance wheel and hairspring.
Right.
And that's correlating with, to create whiskey, you have to convert starch into sugar. So it's your mashing process where you're converting that starch, barley, into sugar through water.
And exactly here. So here is where you have this power, but it needs to be converted into something you can use it for, right? So this is sort of the start of the gear chain, and this is where the regulation of that disbursement of power and the frequency of that power comes to play for the final goal of timekeeping.
Excellent. And it brings us to our next part, the escapement.
Right. So an escapement is really, that's where there's a transmission of power out of the core unit into something, right? So an escapement would be used to have any sort of complication.
And it's kind of like fermentation. Can you explain what fermentation is in the distilling process?
Yeah, of course. So the fermentation is basically, like you said, after you mill and you harvest, essentially whether it be wheat, grains, barley, corn, whatnot, you end up boiling it down to, extract the sugar, basically. At that point, you have something called wort. So it's basically just a really unrefined, like sugar water for the most part.
Delicious.
Yeah, and then you pitch a little yeast into it. You let it ferment, and then it becomes something called wash. And that's basically just like a really gross beer at that point.
Yep, also
in
delicious.
layman's terms. And then from there, you actually go into the distillation process. So, we're using really tall copper pot stills. We use our super secret distillation method. Not really, but it's a low and slow style cooking, as Tommy likes to say, like cooking a brisket. Just very meticulous,
12 hours,
slow, and
baby.
methodical.
Spray it every now and then.
When I get a smoke, I'm coming to this guy.
Yeah.
He's gonna be my ace in the hole.
That's how I cook duck, baby. Low and slow is the way to go. Yep.
Like a gentleman.
Yeah. So the low and slow method that actually allows us to what we refer to as cutting the spirit, because there are multiple types of alcohol that are produced through the distillation process. Not all of them are good.
Right.
Little fun fact, I'm not going to get into dates because they're a little fuzzy, but back when they used to make absinthe, they didn't really know that there's the bad types of like poisonous alcohol that come from the wash, so to speak. And that's what was making people go blind, because they weren't burning off those alcohols. The bad alcohols burn off at a lower temperature or a higher temperature. So during the distillation process, they're heating this wash up, and the bad vapors are essentially burning off first. So they're letting that kind of burn off, and then once it gets to just the right temperature, they cut the vapor off. They basically seal the still, so to speak, and you have what's called the heart of the spirit. And those are the good alcohols, the phenols, the good juice, basically. They reroute that, and then they basically get the heart of the wash, and there's still a little bit of alcohol on the bottom that's technically poisonous, but it doesn't burn off until it's at a much higher temperature. So that goes through a second fermentation process to get more purity, and that changes from distillery. I know like some vodkas say they distill 9 times. It's 2 times, maybe 3 is usually good. But
That's why all vodka is
it
gluten-free, by
varies.
the way. But, but
Kelly, if you're watching this, all vodka is gluten-free.
but that heart would be your gear train then. going
Well,
back.
yeah, I was about to say, if you get sort of metaphysical about this for a second, philosophical, if you will, I think the whole process is the gear chain, right? So we were getting a little bit more specific about what parts could correlate, and but the whole process of distillation is really sort of that transferal of power through the mechanism.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's sort of taking a step back and looking at the whole thing, you know, as one process, however long it needs to get there, and however the gear ratios are cut, and however that power is transferred towards an end goal.
If your
But my
distillation
favorite,
isn't right.
but my favorite part is the next part,
Oh, of course, and that comes down to the aging.
and that's where we also have a poison correlation.
Age and patina.
Yeah. So you guys age whiskey, and that's a fundamental part of Scotch, and it's a fundamental part of what we do at Analog Shift is find these great old aged things with patina that actually add character to what they are, and to me that's the X factor, right? Because anybody could distill alcohol and put it in a bottle and sell it. But there's something else to letting it wait around. Right now, in my case, watches are most of the time not sitting in a shelf somewhere waiting for somebody to find a great old watch. It does happen. More often, their aging process is out in the world being worn and used and loved and handed down and lost, and forgotten and found, right? You guys are very patient. We're out in the world doing things, and then all of a sudden, we're old. Wait a second. Am I talking about watches anymore or myself? I don't know.
It correlates. I like it.
Yeah.
Keep on rocking.
By the way, the poison correlation was I was thinking, like, oh boy, we're talking about poisonous alcohol now. Watches did use radioactive luminous paint.
You wore one the other night, and we
that's
saw
right.
where the watch.
The radium burned the dial because the hands were stationary for so long that the radioactive, luminous paint basically burned the, part of the finish off the dial. You know, we don't use that anymore.
Yeah, no, I have an extra toe now. And only 4 hours.
As long as you don't lick or snort it, it's mostly okay.
Write that one down.
But no,
kids.
this is where, I think we really nailed it the other night when we were discussing this, Tommy. It was like, it's the aging and the patina that connects whiskey and vintage watches, right? Much is said, there's plenty of watch whiskey combos in the world, right? But this is where I like this story, because it really pulls together to that.
1,000%. And it's the patient eye. It's the eye that learns to appreciate the whiskey or the watch, that can understand that why and what the time has done to the timepiece or to the whiskey. And it's you have so many clients coming in here asking you for different rare watches, right? There's so many, and how do you correlate that into the person's story? Someone comes in here as they drive. We were with Aston Martin this weekend. They drive the new Aston Martin vehicles, right?
Yeah.
They drink Glenn Roethlisberger's cup.
Yeah.
They wear tailored suits to their liking. I want a watch that goes with my lifestyle. Mm-hmm. How do you get that? How do you get them to that point? And when they come in, they ask, "What's your most popular watch?"
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the most popular watches are probably the ones that are being hyped, out in the world through social media, through the blogosphere, through fashion and tastemaking and all of these things, and whether that's a name brand thing like a Patek Philippe Nautilus or a Rolex Daytona, or whether there's something a little bit more enigmatic about them, and they want something that's almost to the point of like Tim Burton enigmatic, where they have to do something counterculture, to the extreme. I try not to ever assume that a certain thing goes with a certain thing. Sometimes it's surprising what goes together well. But I do like to sort of massage that and see what might fit.
And the most popular might not fit that person.
Yeah, more often than not, they don't. Yeah.
It's great how that works.
Yeah, I think that goes right back to the age statement conversation from earlier.
Come on and asking for a specific
Yeah.
Islander gauging your own whiskey. That's what I do.
And even in vintage, by the way, it's there's a lot of things out there about what you should buy with vintage. Especially with things like Submariners. I want a fat font kissing for Bart Simpson Submariner because you've read it on a blog somewhere that those words mean something.
Hit all the target words.
Right,
Yeah.
and then you sort of ask, well, do you know what any of that means? No. Well, let's unpack it. Let me explain it to you. Then I'm going to show you something with none of those things and see how you feel, or all of those things, or more things. And I think that's that journey.
I went on a hell of a journey this weekend with it. I found.
I started this journey 20-something years ago. I'm still doing it. And I started Analog Shift to basically justify buying all the watches that I wanted to experience.
You justified it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was having.
I'm a professional justifier.
Another great T-shirt. Stay tuned
wait,
for the merch
hang on.
of Casks Classics.
Merch is coming. This is good. This is good.
After having a conversation with Raymond, I used the military watches and the Captain Willard.
Yeah.
It was so cool, and I went down to that wormhole with the A11s and the SEMAs. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The WWWs.
Oh, that was so
The Dirty
yeah.
Dozen.
Yeah.
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 You know it's a good watch if it has a nickname.
Yep.
Yeah. You know it's definitely worth something and going to be worth more if it has a nickname.
It's like neighborhoods and like boxers. Nicknames are earned too.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't make up your own nickname, right?
Right.
We gotta find a nickname for the Glen Rothus. We gotta get an earned nickname for the Glen Rothus. Now that's my goal for the next 6 months. Get an authentic nickname for the Glen Rothus.
I'm gonna go with Delicious.
Ooh, nailed it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, although I did learn tonight that you've been holding out on me and there's a few expressions I haven't tasted yet, so.
We're getting geared up for that one.
All right.
We have them all set up for you.
Okay.
So Glen Rothus went through several different changes. Most recently, we wanted our age statement in this specific line, focusing on longevity, right? But there are some extremely rare pieces out there. We found some this weekend up in the Hamptons.
We did.
So we got to have two expressions that I've never even seen in
wow.
our offices.
See, isn't that cool?
Finding them out in the wild?
I mean,
absolutely.
you find them out in the wild, but also, like, you do this professionally. I do this my corner professionally. I still find stuff that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
Love that.
And we were not dressed whiskey men style.
Yeah.
We were
Jeans, t-shirts, 3-hour trek up to basically Montauk at that point.
Yeah, we were 20 minutes away from Montauk.
Sure.
Well, I just wanted a bite to eat,
Yeah.
and we found ourselves in one of the most posh places out there. We were significantly underdressed,
Yeah,
and we
that's
were
what they
treated
do.
as such too.
Yeah,
And then we said, hey, we'll have some of your Varus whiskey and buy a few for those guys too. A nice subtle flex on that one.
right.
But it's funny that it stood out on the back bar for me. I'm like, I don't know that label, and this is my brand that I focus on every day.
Yeah.
So if you're out in the wild, what's something that catches your eye? What's something that you see and you're like, oh yeah, that should be in my showroom?
Well, I think for me it's that I don't want to say I'm getting bored of steel sports watches, he says, while wearing a steel sports watch. But I do think there's something slightly elevated about being so far behind that you're ahead. I'm talking specifically about the sort of next revolution, I think, in style, which is wristwatches that are less purpose-built and more artistic from the get, right? Something that was avant-garde at the time that it was made, something that was a little bit more, I don't know, what's the word? Just sort of a little bit more whimsical in its expression, right from the beginning of its design, something that wouldn't hold up underwater or in space, but is a beautiful thing.
It's meant to be pretty.
Yeah. And there is some really, really neat stuff out there, whether it's pre-war Art Deco, whether it's jet age, asymmetric designed American watches, whether it's 60s, 70s Swiss watches with really unusual construction materials, unusual material dials in particular, the stones and meteorites and all of these sorts of things, or hand-finished cases that have been hand-hammered, or made to look like bark or whatever. I mean, these are beautiful objects that don't fall under any category of desire for the last 30 years in watch collecting. And so that stuff, I see that out there, I'm like, oh yeah.
Let's switch it up.
There's more to this than sports watches.
Fun.
I love sports watches.
Yes.
I always love sports watches, but there's more to it.
And
Let's tell those stories.
Yeah, there are people that are coming in that might not be suited for a sports watch that you would want to have something in your Rolodex for.
That's right.
And that's like us. They're people like, what's the best value whiskey? Is there a value whiskey? It's up to your liking. It's up to your flavor profile. Your flavor palette on what you're going to enjoy. And I think that's, again, fun having this brand where it's like, okay, I just walked you through the entire line. You have the 10, the 12, Maker's Cut, the 18, the 25. It's like, what about what was made 30 years ago? What was made 60 years ago? There's still bottles flying around. Yes, there are. We have to run a really deep dive into it. And
let's get them and drink them.
Yes.
That's my recommendation. And on that note, we're done. Good night. We got work to do.
We will find them, I promise. We'll have a sequel for
absolutely.
This one. But even with that, it's hard to put a price on that. You were saying it before. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to lie to you about a price.
Right.
I'm not going to steer you for it to be more if it's worth or less if it's worth, So how do you put a price on these real watches? Like
I just totally make them up.
Nailed it.
No, I mean, I think realistically, there's some of what we're selling, the sort of blue chip vintage and pre-owned watches that are pretty well defined in the marketplace. So we price based on rarity, condition, and the value of our service and guarantee.
Yeah.
If this is a unique piece or a potentially unique piece or something just really exquisite that I've never seen in a certain condition, look, I get my best watches by paying the right price for it. So I'll pay up to get something special. And does that mean that it's going to have a reflective price? Yeah, of course it will. Find another one that makes you feel that way. And if I get stuck with it, that's okay.
I'll find it.
I'm not going to be sad.
Yeah.
Look, my pricing mechanism, people always ask me, I was an entrepreneur when I started this. I've been acquired now, but I function the same way. To me, I still buy watches based on whether or not I'm okay being stuck with it. Because a few years ago, if I got stuck with it, I was stuck with it. It was me.
Yeah.
Today, I might be using the resources that Watches of Switzerland has provided me with, but I still function the same way. I only buy a watch at a price that I'm comfortable with if I'm comfortable with not selling it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And with that, you got people that are trying to pull a little fast one on you as well. You gave us a full education on a Frankenstein watch.
Oh.
So can you explain to us what that means?
Well, I know...
People don't even know that they have a Frankenstein watch.
Well, I mean, you guys have certainly experienced this in your industry with fakes.
Yes.
Right? And it's terrifying that that's a thing, particularly with something that you could ingest and might kill you.
And also with Diane Stewart, who's our master whiskey maker and distiller for the Naked Grouse. She studied forensics at Edinburgh University, not for like CSI purposes, but to understand what goes in a whiskey and how to let you know like that is what it says in the label and what it is in the bottle. So
I mean, it's amazing. And so fakes in my industry are prevalent, of course. But I want to say that they're relatively easy to identify for somebody who does it professionally.
yes.
All right. What makes things harder are so-called Frankensteins. And Frankensteins are an assemblage of parts that may all independently be genuine, but are incorrect for the age of the watch or the reference of the watch. And it's not an exact science because there is some flexibility here. Records during certain periods of Swiss history were not fantastic. So, could that handset have been put on that watch even though we don't think it came until 3 years later? It's possible, sometimes. But the really evil stuff is when you have people who know what they're talking about and they put things together to make it look like something it's not. And so Frankensteins are the biggest challenge in authenticating vintage. It's not that they're not real, it's that they're not correct. So for me, the word original is banned from analog shift vocabulary. Because unlike cars, where every major component has a VIN number, a serial number stamped on it, watches don't. Movements and cases and other components have serial numbers, maybe, but they're not the same serial number. They were batch manufactured numbers. So we use authentic and correct. We guarantee our watches are authentic and correct, unless otherwise noted. Maybe it has a later part on it, but we call it out.
And let you know why that it would be.
Why it's acceptable. If that watch has a bracelet that was made a few years later, it's because it was a reinforced bracelet, it was upgraded, right? As long as we call that out, it's okay.
That's interesting. I know they do something similar. I'm sure you're familiar with like Barrett Jackson or Beacon Model auctions.
Sure.
All these cars rolling across the auction block, a lot of them say they're matching numbers, matching the serial numbers to the engine and the chassis of the car. And you see so many of these resto mod cars out there, and they, 67 Bronco resto mod, you fetch $250,000 for it pretty easy, but is it original?
And does originality matter if what you're trying to do is drive a car off-road to the best of its ability? You might actually want some newer parts.
Yeah.
But if you're spending that kind of money on a wristwatch that somebody says is correct, that's where you got to be careful. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. As somebody who's modifying a few vehicles in his life, I'm okay with that. And frankly, I'm okay with modifying watches too. I'm not that much of a snob. I just want whoever's doing it or whoever's buying it to know.
Authenticity. Trust.
That's it. Yeah, that's trust.
So now to be officially authentic, and we can close on this.
Yeah.
If you want the authentic experience for the Glenroe office when you walk into the Analog Shift showroom, what watch would you pair with the SKUs that you have here?
Ooh.
So what would be the comparable to a Glenroe Office 12?
Let's start there. Okay.
Excellent.
All right. So for the 12, I'm going to go with a vintage military watch. I think that the temptation would be to put on a watch everybody knows, a Datejust or a something along those lines, something that's sort of universally known. But I actually think what's cool about the 12 is that it's appealing to people for different reasons. And that's why I really, really love military watches, because they can be had at sub $1,000 price point, they can be had at several $100,000 price point. And the reasons for those prices are different and disparate and exactly the same. You want something with provenance, style, and tradition. And I think a military wristwatch, whether you go with a Benris or a Hamilton or a Marathon GI, or you get into the Dirty Dozen wristwatches from the Ministry of Defense in the late 40s, or you get into Mill subs from Rolex or Marine Nationale Tudors or whatever it might be. I'm going to go with a category and say that the 12-year is a military watch because there's a reason you're drinking it, and it made it for a reason.
Love that.
Okay.
Thanks.
What's the next one?
Did you nail that one?
I think that's pretty solid. Yeah, to me, that's kind of the daily driver, fits the scenario. Universe.
That's what it says on the tin.
Gotta go with the whiskey guy to make sure.
Yeah, that's right. Otherwise, you don't want me writing your copy. It'll all be F-bombs.
I appreciate the lack of profanity today.
Tried so hard.
It's noted and appreciated.
Lived here a long
James.
time. It's a thing. I know. Potty mouth.
I appreciate it. It's honesty.
Yeah.
For the Maker's Cup, what would you put for the Maker's Cup? Maker's Cup non-age statement for you guys that don't know. Showcasing the best of what the Glenroe Office is. Higher and proof, 48.8% alcohol. Showcasing the Glenroe Office distillery as a whole.
I think there's some mad scientist element to this, right? Like I think it's sort of all the pieces, but throwing it out there and seeing how it works together.
And me telling you that it's good, not an age. Yes.
Yes, also that. And so I'm actually
as the distiller, the whiskey maker. I'm not that guy. But
you're not the guy. You're not that guy.
No, not yet.
So I'm actually tempted here to go away from vintage for a minute and focus on another trend that's occurring with the high-end independent micro brands, right? So one of the cool things that's happening in Switzerland and frankly all around the world, Japan, Germany, and even in the USA, is a revitalization of high-end watchmaking in small production numbers. And a lot of, you'd say that all design is derivative today, so some of these watches are derivative of classics, right? Much in the way that the Maker's Cut draws from your classic lines. But ultimately, when you combine them and you put your own mad scientist spin on it, it's a total unique thing. And so whether that brand might be Fiona Kruger or De Bethune or MB&F, these are all brands, or FP Journe. These are all sort of avant-garde, ultra weird, but honestly very very traditional, spun in a blender and spun out today for a totally unique experience and a different type of buyer. So I'm going to go with that. And by the way, some of these have been around for 10, 20, 30 years now and have become vintage and desirable in their own right.
Super cool.
Yeah.
And again, the watch experts, watch makers,
Yeah.
who know and understand everything that goes into a timepiece, telling you what's good.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
On brand, what would you say?
Most definitely.
And as for the 18, which we're drinking tonight.
I'm going to go with maybe a brand here that is classic and iconic, but not as well known as the others. And it's Universal Genève. It's a brand that's not currently functioning. It's not currently alive. Probably will be again soon if I had to guess. But this was a really brilliant brand that's got some real heritage and is responsible for watches like the Pole Router or the Nina series of chronographs from the 1960s, which are really hot. But they just do beautiful things in beautiful ways, incredibly well, and no one knows about them.
Love it. That is perfectly on brand.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Lovely. Do you agree? Whiskey guy?
That is looking beyond.
It's a much deeper perspective. And how about the 25?
Well, so the 25, I think, is to me, it means you have to play the hits, but you have to do it in a slightly unexpected way, slightly more refined way, slightly more evolved way. Everybody knows what an AP Audemars Piguet Royal Oak is because it's one of the hot watches. It would be very easy to say it's a Royal Oak. It is a Royal Oak, but it's a Royal Oak chronograph, or it's a Royal Oak perpetual calendar, or it's a Royal Oak Power Reserve or GMT kind of thing. It's got all the DNA that makes a Royal Oak desirable, but it's more.
It's just as special with everything else that's out there, and people don't understand it, but it has that factor that puts you. It has the James dust on it that makes it analog shift.
I don't know if we should be saying things like James dust.
it worked.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's fun though. And I think we tasted people yesterday on the 25, and I think people were genuinely blown away by it. And anyone that tastes Glenrothes for the first time, it's like, oh. But we were saying, like, not knowing that AP was out there, like.
Yeah, I mean, everybody expects the sort of traditional Royal Oak, right? Everybody wants the steel one with the blue dial. It's a great watch. Of course, it's a great watch. It's an icon for a reason.
Yes.
But it's not the only thing that they do. And even looking beyond, believe it or not, Audemars Piguet makes watches that aren't Royal Oak, right? And that could be something to explore in the future.
Yeah.
What else do you do that isn't the iconic series? That isn't just an icon unto itself, that isn't just an icon evolved, but it's totally different. My guess is there's probably something in your portfolio that would fit that other category.
Stay tuned for a few more months.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
It will be coming.
You know how I know we're done?
The glass is done. Yep. And I think that is the perfect way to close on.
Okay, I'll just...
The old switcheroo, as they say. But yeah, I really, really appreciate the way that you broke down your brands with our brand. And I think it is perfectly suited. And again, it's when you're choosing a timepiece, I think that there's something out there for everybody. There's a whiskey out there for everybody, but I really feel that the Glenrothes is the whiskey drinker's whiskey. You could find something inside of a bottle of Glenrothes that you weren't quite aware that you loved until you tasted it. And it's the same deal with your showroom.
Well, yes, but I totally agree with the whiskey statement. I've been drinking whiskey since I was 21 years old.
Not a day sooner.
Not a day sooner. This has been a delightful thing to learn about in more recent years.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for giving me your whiskey.
It's been an absolute pleasure giving you my whiskey. But thank you guys for watching. If you are in the market for a timepiece of a lowercase L for luxury, as Max says. Thank you, Max, for that line. Please follow James, follow Analog Shift. Come on by, make an appointment, check out this amazing showroom that I actually started my career in.
That's another story. But
Which
we're gonna have to do a part 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Find out how Tommy started his career here.
Pretty epic, if I must say so myself. But come check it out. There is plenty of Glenrothes for you to have. You will now be able to have a lovely, we got to name this thing too. We'll just call it the James Highball for now.
I think it's the James Stewart highball machine.
Oh, yes. Boom.
Done. They gave us a highball machine, guys. You can come here and have a Glenrothes highball at the Analog Shift offices.
We actually educated them on what highball machine they should have for their office that they would be having Glenrothes in.
That's true. And by that I mean he told me.
Yes.
No, please reach out to us. You can follow us on social media at Analog Shift. Email us info@analogshift.com. Be happy to have you come by and share some Glenrothes with you and play with some cool old watches.
And talk Star Wars.
Also Star Wars.
But saying goodbye for Mr. Matt Wozniak. You follow him at the Glenrothes Matt. Mr. James Lamdin. Thank you guys very much for tuning in for this edition of Casks and Classics, and we look forward to seeing you guys soon. Cheers. Thank you very much. Sláinte.
I should give that back to you.
That was awesome. Thank you guys so much.